During 1896 and 1897, 7 years before the Wright brothers would take flight, several cigar-shaped airship reports appeared in newspapers across the United States. One account appeared in the April 19, 1897 edition of the Dallas Morning News. It was written by S.E. Hayden. The account reported that an airship crashed into the property of J.S. Proctor at 6 a.m. on the 17th. The pilot was described as not of this world and had died on impact. Debris from the crash was spread across several acres when the craft collided with Mr. Proctor's windmill. Wreckage from the craft was dumped into a nearby well, and the pilot was buried at the local Aurora cemetery. T.J. Weems, a United States Signal Service officer from nearby Fort Worth, viewed the body and referred to the pilot as a Martian. And Mr. Weems, who was also an astronomer, would become the first United States government official to observe an extraterrestrial and report back to the government. Papers found on the pilot were assumed to be a journal of his travels, but were written in an unknown hieroglyphic-type script and could not be deciphered. It's likely these papers returned to Fort Worth with Mr. Weems and fell into the hands of government officials. The beginning of the UFO cover-up was at hand. The first official observation of an alien, the crashed remains of a craft, and all the reports of airships from the previous months would cause serious concerns in Washington. How the government would handle this information will have repercussions on the entire world till present day.
Visits by little green men and flying saucers. The stuff of science fiction or drive-in theaters, maybe? Think again. In 2003, with over 400 visits by alien craft or alien creatures in British Columbia, it seems as though we're under some sort of invasion. That July, 2 women from Kelowna, British Columbia, had a visit of the terrifying kind.
My friend Linda and I were sitting at the computer late the night before she left to go back to Abbotsford. She suddenly said to me, "Why don't we go stargazing?" And I mentioned to her that it was getting quite late. It was, around midnight. I was really tired. Could we possibly think about doing this the next time she was up? But she really insisted on going.
The women got into Karina's car and pretty soon found themselves on a back road, looking for a secluded area, shielded from the city lights. Karina was new to the area and wasn't sure where to find a good spot for stargazing. They soon found themselves on a road that runs between Kelowna and Vernon. There was no moon that night, so it was very dark. Karina stopped her car somewhere beside Kelowna's landfill. Karina pulled out a large spotlight she had in the car and pointed it down the road ahead of them. As Linda watched through her binoculars, she noticed a group of 3 stars in the shape of a triangle. She pointed them out to Karina. Neither of them could figure out what the lights could be. They both agreed on one thing. They weren't lights from a plane. There was no engine sound. The lights started to move ahead of their car, changing color from white to green. The air, which had been warm, turned musty and cold. It took a second for Karina to register what they were looking at. These weren't anything from this planet, staring back at them from out of the dark. They began to move towards the 2 women. They ran back to the car as fast as they could, but it was like moving through quicksand. It was as if the whole world around them was slowing down to a crawl. Karina remembers having a hard time getting her hands to open the car door. Once they were inside the car, she tried to get it started. The lights inside the car flashed on and off randomly. It was as if the car had gone crazy. Karina finally got the car started and sped back towards town. As they drove along, Karina remarked to Linda that she felt weird, as if electricity had been zapped through her whole body, as if by a charge from a battery. Linda took comfort from the fact that they both felt the same way. That's when she looked at the dashboard clock. As they continued their drive home, Linda commented on the time. The women felt they hadn't been out of the car for more than a few minutes, but according to the clock, it had been almost an hour. Where did that missing time go? Suddenly, they both saw another large orb low in the sky on the far side of a field. Karina stopped the car. Could this be one of the same orbs they had seen earlier? Karina tried to convince Linda the orb was just a low-flying aircraft or helicopter. But even with both windows down, neither one of them could hear any noises from the mysterious orb. It started to move further away from their vehicle. To prove her point, that it was just a plane, Karina held up her spotlight out of the car window and flashed it 3 times directly at the orb. To her horror, it stopped dead in midair, then came flying down directly at them. Terrified, Karina panicked and took off down the road. She headed for home, trying to ignore the celestial object high above. The next morning, as Karina got out of bed, she discovered a large bruise on her left breast. She also felt nauseous and had severe head pressure. As she sat at her kitchen table drinking coffee, Linda joined her. Linda also complained about feeling sick, and suddenly, her right nostril started to bleed.
Oh man. Well, that is really...
Karina grabbed a towel and tried to staunch the flow of blood. After they'd stopped the nosebleed, Linda left to take a shower and clean up. Karina's daughter then came down to the kitchen. She too felt nauseous and complained of a stuffed-up nose. Then, just like Linda, her nose began to gush blood from the right nostril. Karina helped her stop the bleeding, and not wanting to alarm her daughter, she told her nosebleeds can happen when someone feels sick.
I don't know.
But she suspected that her encounter the previous evening hadn't ended at the front door.
In 1987, a terrifying event unfolded with 2 consecutive nights of UFO sightings. Green and white balls of light that formed into all types of shapes hovered directly above the Flushing Meadow Zoo, causing the animals to become greatly disturbed. On the morning following the second night of UFO sightings, the caretaker and other employees were horrified to discover every animal in the zoo were slaughtered by mutilation. They revealed that all of the animals were securely locked in their pens, with no sign of forced or keyed entry. But the corpses appeared as though they had been surgically autopsied or examined. Despite the mutilations, little or no blood was present. To avoid controversy, the zoo closed without explanation, and no trespassing signs were placed near the entrance. Park department personnel and police were summoned to remove the carcasses. Later, the zoo staff stated that the animal deaths and mutilations were eventually explained away as the work of vandals or ritualistic killers. However, it was determined that the perpetrators would have caused excessive noise while killing the animals, and would have left a significant amount of blood and other evidence behind. None of this evidence was present. No alarms sounded off, and the park police and other employees working nearby heard nothing. The zoo employees had reasonable concerns that this event could happen again.
there's many times he'd be telling me the story and just get cracked up and just turn wide the sheet and just quit and not say nothing else about it. He just wouldn't talk about it at all.
This story happened in Christian County, Kentucky, on a little farm outside of Kelly, just 8 miles north of the city of Hopkinsville.
Hopkinsville in Christian County in the mid-1950s was principally a Protestant community of blue-collar and professional workers, a community not real stoutly committed to change in those days. Keep in mind also that this event occurred in the midst of August, when it was hot as the hinges of Hades. And so people tended not to get terribly excited about things. When it was hot weather, they would get even hotter. There was a police officer at nearby Shady Oaks restaurant, maybe 3 miles from Kelly. And this police officer indicated that sometime just prior to the reported landing of the spacecraft at Kelly, that he saw a series, maybe 3 meteors streaking northeastwardly across the sky in the general directional pattern of Kelly. It was a Sunday night, August 21st, 1955. At about 7:30 p.m., Billy Taylor went out to the outdoor privy, and while out there, observed a spaceship hovering 40 or 50 feet above the ground, and observed it land in about a 40-foot ravine or gully behind the house. Of course, concerned about it, he came on back into the house and told the members of the Sutton family whom he was visiting about this event, and Billy's reputation was noted for being creative, to put it in a nice way, and so the family paid a little attention.
About 20 minutes later, Lucky looked out the window, and what he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. Coming up towards the house from the gully were several creatures unlike anything he had ever seen before.
When members of the Sutton family first saw the creatures approaching the house, they described them as little human-like figures, 3 to 4 feet tall, with pointed ears. But the most prominent feature of their entire makeup was the large, round eyes that appeared not to blink.
A few minutes later, one of the alien creatures came right up to the window and looked in. Lucky Sutton grabbed his shotgun and fired through the window. The face disappeared. Lucky and Billy Ray, now armed as well, decided to go outside to find out what happened to the creature they'd shot. As Taylor stepped out onto the porch, a huge hand reached down from the overhang, grabbed him by the hair, and tried to pull him up. Taylor managed to get free, and both he and Lucky retreated into the house and loaded their guns with ammunition. Now the 2 men started firing at these little beings as if they were in the fight of their lives. But what happened when they fired was even more terrifying.
When the firing started, these little creatures were knocked off their feet or would do a somersault and bounce right up and float off.
Inside the house, there was absolute chaos. The women and children hid under the bed in terror, while Lucky and Billy Ray kept shooting at the advancing aliens through the walls and window screens of the house.
Stay there! Stay there!
The terrifying attack went on for hours. Each time Billy Ray or Lucky hit their mark, the creatures would react by floating away, as if they were surrounded by an invisible force field, and then they would crawl back towards the house. At around 11 p.m., about 3 hours after the battle started, there was a brief respite. Without wasting a moment, Billy Ray and Lucky loaded everyone into cars and drove to the nearest police station in Hopkinsville to get help.
When the investigating officers arrived, they made a thorough search of the house. They were joined soon thereafter by personnel from the sheriff's office and even some military personnel from nearby Fort Campbell. A thorough search was made of the house and the grounds surrounding the house, and never did they find anything in the way of evidence.
Other than bullet holes and the emotional state of the terrified family members, the investigating officers found no concrete evidence. Some reports suggest that police found a strange luminous stain in the grass where one of the creatures fell after being shot, but no one took a sample, and by morning there was no trace.
Jackie Gleason will always be remembered as one of America's greatest comedy talents. Born in Brooklyn, New York City, Gleason was a graduate of the School of Hard Knocks, which built his unyielding character and fortitude. Gleason became a workaholic and perfectionist. This passion also extended into his personal life. Fascinated by flying saucers and the unexplained, Gleason created one of the world's greatest parapsychological libraries. The bulk of it resides today at the University of Miami Library. Privately, Gleason was an avid UFO researcher, and the reason for this is astonishing. Gleason had a personal relationship with Richard Nixon, and in one conversation with the president, Gleason asked if there was anything Nixon could tell him about UFOs. Were they real? Were there really alien spacecraft? Nixon reportedly responded, "Well, Jackie, if you could arrange to arrive at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa sometime over the next few days, I'll show you some things that may answer some of your questions." Gleason arrived at the base 2 days later and was escorted to a covert storage facility. Once inside, he passed through several levels of security checkpoints. Finally, Gleason was taken into a large space where unusual debris was scattered across the floor. Suddenly, a light beam struck the center of the room. Gleason was astonished to see what appeared to be a portion of a damaged flying disc floating a few feet above the floor. Gleason was spellbound by what he was seeing, but the surprises didn't end there. A few moments later, Gleason was escorted to another room. In this room were 3 containers with glass windows for viewing. Within the containers were the occupants of the crashed saucer. The officer confided to Gleason that, quote, "The beings were about 4 to 5 feet tall. 2 of the bodies were badly damaged, but 1 was in very good shape." As Gleason gazed upon the extraterrestrial corpse, the officer added, "This one died later." Gleason studied the being's large oval eyes, grayish skin, and the appearance of being male. Gleason asked the officer if all of the beings were male, to which the officer replied, "Your guess is as good as ours."
The Great Los Angeles Air Raid occurred on February 24, 1942, when a UFO strayed too close to the coastline. It was less than 3 months after the United States entered World War II as a result of the Japanese Imperial Navy's attack on Pearl Harbor, and 1 day after the bombardment of Elwood on the 23rd. Something flew over the coastline, causing the military to go on alert. Air raid sirens sounded throughout Los Angeles County on that night. A total blackout was ordered, and thousands of air raid wardens were summoned to their positions. At 3:16 a.m., the 37th Coast Artillery Brigade began firing 12.8-pound anti-aircraft shells into the air at the reported object. Over 1,400 shells would eventually be fired. Pilots of the 4th Interceptor Command were alerted but never ordered to fly. The artillery fire continued sporadically until 4:14 a.m. To this day, no one knows for sure what they were shooting at. Images taken on that night clearly show a saucer-shaped object hovering within the intense beams of the military spotlights.
Family were going to bed 11 o'clock, and I looked out the window of my bedroom and I saw this green shimmering light in the sky and billowing clouds, a small point in the sky, maybe 500, tops 1,000 feet in the air. So it was well within our atmosphere. And the smoke was billowing out and green shimmering lights behind it. I called to my mother. The sky is green. And she comes in and she looks, sure enough, the sky was green. And pretty soon my whole family, my parents, my sister, and myself were out on the front lawn. So it was summer because we were still in our pajamas and house coats. Father didn't know what it was. My mother said, "It's the second coming." Very religious woman, and she thought it was the second coming because none of us had any clue as to what it was. But it was a huge craft, perfectly silent, huge round lights of various colors, none of which were FAA standard, and just sat there. And then we looked off to the left, and here's a little funnel cloud of smoke coming down. And it was later, my sister just didn't pay any more attention after that. And under hypnosis, it was revealed that this little tornado of smoke that came down had a smaller craft in it. And small gray beings came out of that craft, took me, and then took her. She remembers them taking me and then taking her to be examined. She doesn't know what happened with me, but she knows what happened with her. And then returned us. And when we don't know if our parents were taken or not, because when she was returned, I was back on the lawn, and so were my parents. We were all just looking up, like we were frozen in time. Okay. And then I can only assume this is the missing time phenomenon. Okay, so when we were all back in place, we were switched back on, so to speak, and the craft had departed. All it was left was that smoke. We're watching as the sky seemed to be giving birth to this huge craft. The lights were there, and it just kind of came through a vortex, and that's why I believe that the extraterrestrials come from other planets and or other dimensions through a vortex. They instead of going from point A to point B, they fold time and leave their space-time and arrive at ours instantaneously.
In 1939, Cordell Hull, Secretary of State for President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, decided to show his cousin a little surprise. Hull brought his cousin, the Reverend Turner Hamilton Holt, into a sub-basement of the U.S. Capitol building to show him something that would shake him to his soul. Hull consequently made his cousin swear to never reveal what he was about to see. Hull took Holt into a room in that basement that contained 4 large glass containers into which a child could easily fit. In each of the containers was a creature of horrendous visage. The tiny humanoid-like creatures were floating in some sort of chemical preservative. According to the Reverend Holt, Cordell Hull told him that this had to be kept secret to prevent widespread panic among the American public. Holt asked his family to wait until both he and cousin Cordell were both dead before revealing this information. And Holt's children did just that.
At 7 a.m. on the 30th of June in 1908, near the lower Tunguska River in Siberia, a large explosion occurred. The explosion was so massive that it caused damage 400 miles away and was heard even further. For several nights all over northern Europe, the sky glowed enough to light the streets of London. At first, it was assumed that a massive meteorite had collided with the Earth. However, after the Second World War and the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, photos of the cities were compared with aerial photos of the Tunguska blast, and they were stunningly similar. As a result of this, various scientists speculated that a nuclear explosion had taken place over the area, and because no nation possessed a nuclear device at that time, the logical conclusion was that it was from an exploded alien nuclear-powered craft.
On November 23, 2019, a UFO was captured on video in Tucson, Arizona. The remarkable 40-minute video was released by the Department of Homeland Security and was recorded by a DHS spy plane equipped with FLIR optical technology. The spy plane's purpose was to discover drug smugglers over the Arizona regions. 20 minutes into the flight, the UFO was spotted and tracked for a full 40 minutes. The footage was examined by the UFO AC Research Group, and it was determined that the unusual aircraft was unnatural and unidentifiable. The DHS launched their own investigation and to this day have not produced an explanation. The speed of the craft was estimated to be 90 to 200 miles an hour, and it would make abrupt turns and variations in flight, even rotating at certain times. The length was determined to be 5 to 6 feet long, and a smaller ball-shaped craft flying with it at close proximity was captured in the footage. Most importantly, the craft did not appear to emanate heat or any form of energy.
Then in 1947, the United States government would become mired in secrecy when an alien spacecraft crashed near Roswell, New Mexico. The Roswell incident seemed just to involve debris from a craft of some sort, as no main part of the craft could be found on the Brazil Ranch. This led to speculation that the main part of the craft had managed to travel on before coming to rest. Later, the second section of the saucer was found. It came down in an area west of Sirocco, New Mexico, known as the Plains of San Agustin, where witnesses discovered a strange metallic object and several dead bodies. The bodies and wreckage were sent to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for study. Many speculate it remains there to this day.
One of the turning points that shocked the Allied forces during World War II was the advanced technology possessed by the Germans. The V-2 rocket, basically a 1940s version of most any modern intercontinental ballistic missile, was at least 30 years ahead of what every other government had available. German aircraft were the first to use West Wing technology, despite the fact that such aircraft could not fly in a stable manner without computers, which did not exist in the 1940s. According to the U.S. Army's official history of World War II, some German planes were equipped with television and radar-guided weapons. The Germans were the first to fly jets and the only nation to utilize them during the war. Some were constructed of exotic composite materials, carefully held in place by special radar-absorbing glue. America's B-2 stealth bomber bears a striking resemblance to some of the German jets of the war and were assembled in much the same way. However, those jets were assembled and flown in the 1940s. The debate is, how did Germany, which had been forced to disarm after World War I, develop so much technology in such a short period of time? The conclusion is that they may have had help. German blueprints for a saucer-shaped craft were discovered and examined after the war by the Allied intelligence services, suggesting that the Germans may have had access to one or more crashed UFOs, which had gone down somewhere in Germany at an earlier date. The circular craft, which Germany had no time for mass production, would have been powered by a sophisticated anti-gravity drive using powerful magnetic fields. Was Germany able to glean enough technology from crashed UFOs to jump ahead of the rest of the world in electronics, engineering, and weaponry? Considering the fact that following the war, the United States spent the next 30 years relearning and discovering what Germany already knew in terms of this unearthly technology, the answer might just be yes.
If the United States government somehow was inexplicably unaware of the existence of extraterrestrial life up to the 1950s, then on July 29, 1952, they would be forced to concede the issue when a squadron of UFOs overflew the Capitol. The Washington National Airport sightings were not just a single night of UFO flyovers. From July 12th to July 29th, the Capitol was buzzing with UFO activity on a nightly basis. On July 19th at 11:40 p.m., Air Traffic Controller Edward Nugent spotted several craft 15 miles southwest of the Capitol. There were no scheduled aircraft in the area, and these craft were not flying any established flight paths. He wrote in his report that their movements were completely radical compared to those of ordinary aircraft. Other controllers in the area confirmed the radar blips and observed the orange ball-type UFOs outside their windows. The story made front-page headlines and alarmed the Truman administration. The president himself personally called Captain Edward J. Rupert, the supervisor of the Air Force's Project Blue Book investigation into the UFO mystery, and asked for an explanation of the sightings. The president was told it was a temperature inversion. However, the Air Force placed several jet pilots on nationwide alert with orders to shoot down any UFO that ignores orders to land. To this day, there is no explanation for this incident. The government accepted the weather-related explanation because it was easy to tell this to the public, rather than admit they knew the craft were alien in origin.
In 1973, CBS launched a production about the UFO phenomenon. Veteran news anchor Walter Cronkite was approached with the idea, to which Cronkite eagerly said yes. The reason for Cronkite's interest in the matter was due to his own personal experience witnessing a UFO in his younger years. In the 1950s, Cronkite was part of a news reporter team dispatched to a small South Pacific island to witness the testing of the latest Air Force missile. The reporters had been warned that photography and audio recordings were forbidden. Air Force security personnel monitored the perimeter with guard dogs at their sides. The reporters waited with anticipation for the event, and finally, the missile fired up and was ready to launch. Just then, a large flying disc appeared. Cronkite estimated that the object was 50 to 60 feet in diameter, with a dull gray color, and there didn't appear to be any visible means of propulsion. Due to the explosive noise around him, Cronkite was unable to determine whether the disc emitted any sound. Officers charged at the disc with their guard dogs, which hovered about 30 feet off of the ground. At this moment, the craft suddenly fired out a blue beam of light, which struck the missile. The beam also struck an officer and his dog. The missile was frozen in midair, about 70 feet from the launching pad, and the officer was frozen in mid-step, his guard dog frozen in midair. Suddenly, the missile exploded, and the disc quickly flew away. The officer and his dog recovered with no injuries. Cronkite estimated that the event transpired within 5 minutes. Following the encounter, officers urgently ushered all of the reporters into a concrete observation bunker, where they were addressed by an Air Force colonel. The reporters were told that the entire event was staged as a test to observe their reactions. The colonel added that flying saucers were probably not extraterrestrial, but what people were actually seeing were secret planes being tested by the Air Force. This test was designed to show the media how shocking it could be to suddenly view a new technology. Cronkite was dubious of this explanation, and to his dying day was certain that what he witnessed was not of this earth.
In the early 1950s, astronaut Gordon Cooper was assigned to a jet fighter group in Germany. While stationed there, he remembers very vividly the week an entire formation of circular objects passed over the airbase on an almost daily routine. But that's not all. While a project manager at Edwards Air Force Base, just 3 years before entering America's space program, Cooper had assigned a team of photographers to an area of the vast dry lake beds near Edwards. The former astronaut disclosed that while the crew was deployed, they spotted a strange-looking craft above the lake bed, and they began filming it. Cooper says the object was very definitely hovering above the ground, and then it slowly came down and sat on the lake bed for a few minutes. During this time, the motion picture cameras were filming. There were varied estimates by the cameraman on what the actual size of the object was, but they all agreed that it was at least the size of a vehicle that would carry normal-sized people in it. Colonel Cooper was not fortunate enough to be outside at the time of this incredible encounter, but he did see the films as soon as they were rushed through the development process. It was a typical circular-shaped UFO, he recalls. Not too many people saw it because it took off at quite a sharp angle and just climbed straight on out of sight. Where are these films today? Why would Gordon Cooper, a respected and honorable American hero, make up such a story? According to him, UFOs were seen regularly at Edwards Air Force Base. Perhaps the most damning evidence that the United States was actively participating in a government cover-up comes from Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso. Corso was the chief of the Pentagon's Foreign Technology Desk in Army Research and Development, working under Lieutenant General Arthur Trudeau. And he was on the staff of President Eisenhower's National Security Council for 4 years between 1953 and 1957. In his book, The Day After Roswell, Corso claims that technology gleaned from the Roswell crash helped kickstart technological advancements in accelerated particle beam devices, fiber optics, lasers, integrated circuit chips, and Kevlar material. Corso's duties at the Pentagon required him to oversee the storage of physical evidence and files on the Roswell crash, and to leak this material to corporations for the advancement of our technology. Corso also claimed the Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars, was meant to achieve the destructive capacity of electronic guidance systems in incoming enemy warheads, as well as disabling enemy spacecraft, including those of extraterrestrial origin.
Some of the most compelling evidence that UFOs are real and originate from somewhere else comes from encounters involving the military itself. One such encounter involved the USS FDR crewman Chester Brzezinski, who described what occurred in the year 1958. He stated that he was on a shakedown cruise when a small light appeared in the sky that began following the ship. The mysterious white ball of light accelerated and came so close in range that Brzezinski could make out figures inside the craft. His impression was that these beings were not human. He described the size of the craft as 75 to 100 feet long and at times would change colors. A strong heat wave emanated from the craft. He recalls feeling the heat on his face as he gazed upon the silhouettes of the occupants looking at them. Then, all at once, the base of the craft turned cherry red and the object vanished from sight in a flash. The crew members were stunned and soon after were abruptly transferred. A CIA investigation ensued, but as Brzezinski later stated, thus began a massive cover-up. There is no official record of this incident ever happening.
Something unexplained is going on in the skies over the Hudson River Valley in New York State. Strange happenings torment those who drive its dark highways. Bizarre time-lapse experiences, which are relived as nightmares. It's a place where contact with other worlds is as close as a trek in the nearby woods.
I was driving home at night, and my car just stalled. It's never done that before. Oh, God's sake. So I popped the hood and I got out, and I looked up and I saw this formation of lights. And I kept looking. It was actually this gigantic vessel. I couldn't hear it. I didn't know what it was. It was very odd. When I got home that night, I saw on the news that 3,000 people in the Hudson Valley had seen the same thing. Now, when 3,000 people saw the same thing I did, it's more than just a coincidence.
As early as 1948, the government already knew the UFO secret. In that year, the United States Air Force produced its top secret and highly controversial estimate of the situation, an official report concluding flying saucers to be interplanetary in origin. General Nathan Twining, head of the Air Materiel Command, stated that flying saucers were real and not visionary or fictitious, that they had metallic or light-reflecting surfaces, were circular or elliptical in shape, flat on the bottom and domed on top, and were sometimes sighted in well-kept formation flights varying from 3 to 9 objects. A top-secret Canadian government document dating from 1950, written by Wilbert Smith, the head of the Canadian government's UFO research project entitled Magnet, quotes Mr. Smith saying, "The matter is the most highly classified subject in the United States government, rating higher than the H-bomb." By 1969, after multiple secret studies had concluded that flying saucers were very real, the United States government closed its public study on UFOs. Project Blue Book ended with assurance from the government that the UFOs represented no threat to national security.